I've been asked to, as chairman, I think, to introduce my old friend, if I may so glorify him or me, Dele Ogun. Now, it's customary, I think, at moments like this, to start off with some wonderful bromide, like it is the most enormous pleasure to know and to introduce, and then one goes forth and says whoever it is one's going to. So I think I'll break with tradition and say that our friend Dele this evening has been a bit of a disappointment to me. There you are, you weren't expecting. And I'll tell you for why now, in case you're sort of looking down your nose at either him or me. And it's this, because many, many years ago, when I had a different organisation altogether, the European Atlantic Group, we asked Dele Ogun to speak. Now, I come across Dele when he and I were both protégés, the most wonderful Oxford publisher, John Coleman, and we would be sitting round talking about the Emperor Augustus and his wonderful way of ruling an empire. And it slowly dawned on me that, as it did on John Coleman, that in Dele Ogun was someone extraordinary. I mean, the European Atlantic Group, it actually 3 times espoused the cause of people who could have taken over in their own country and who were making every effort to do so. One was Ajmal Khan in Afghanistan, and if only the world had listened to what he had to say, and it came close, Afghanistan would be a different place. Then there was Boang Din in Burma, and now neither of them have got to the top job in their country, and so I had every hope that Dele would manage that particular job, and I'm still waiting, hence the disappointment. But I don't know that it will be so long-lived, and Dele is one of these extraordinary people, and we are very privileged tonight because he manages to straddle several boundaries in terms of his career, in terms of his profession. And we're going to hear tonight about, or from Dele, in his literary persona, but I think I will say that in my understanding there is no other history written of Nigeria in anything like the degree of research that Dele has put into it. Absolutely, 20 years I'm told of research and 5 years of writing. And I asked Dele if he wanted me to say anything about it, and now I've confessed the source. Perhaps my verdict won't be quite so impressive. Dele says it's a masterpiece. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an enormous privilege for the society, for all of us here, that we have a speaker like Dele Ogun. Thank you, Dele.
I've been struggling this evening to find the right words to convey my thoughts, because this speech really represents a climax of a personal journey, of my life to date in all of its dimensions. The task has been greater this evening because of this venue. Whitehall Place, the National Liberal Club, Whitehall Place. If you haven't done so already, I encourage you after this event to go downstairs and just wander around. This is where history, much of British history, was made. This was the home of the National Liberal Club, the headquarters of the Liberal Party. And it has special significance for me because of a particular gentleman by the name Joseph Chamberlain. Now, for those of you who don't know him, although there are approximately 125 years that divide us, he is somebody that I feel a very intimate connection with. And that was because when I was reading his multi-volume biography, I discovered that he grew up from the age of 10 to the age of 18, playing on the very same playing fields that I played on when I came to this country at the age of 7. The place is Highbury Fields. It is 5 miles from here in Islington. Now, who was Joseph Chamberlain? Some of you may know him as having been the father of the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, the wartime Prime Minister. But he was much more than that. As his biographer put it, he was the prophet and leader of the imperial movement. Such was his influence in British politics at the time that when the toast, the loyal toast was proposed, it was proposed in terms of to Chamberlain and the King, in that order. Now think about that. To Chamberlain and the King. And it was right here, in the then home of the Liberal Party, when that party was the heavyweight counterpart to the Conservative Party, that he reigned. Now, our theme this evening is Nigeria and Britain after Elizabeth. But I think it's necessary for me to say a few things about the period before Elizabeth, for those of you who are not familiar with the Nigeria story, and also the period during Elizabeth's reign. You see, before Elizabeth, it was Queen Victoria who had been the longest reigning monarch of this country. Her reign began in June 1837. This was around the time of the beginning of the project for the making of Nigeria. This was in the wake of the abolition of slavery in 1833. Now, Victoria died on 22nd of January 1901, shortly after Nigeria's first birthday on the 1st of January. Now, think about that. 1st of January 1901 was Nigeria's first birthday because it was made in January 1900. Now, strictly speaking, there were 2 Nigerias at that point. There was northern Nigeria, which was predominantly Islamic, and there was southern Nigeria, which was largely Christian. So they existed as separate countries, the Protectorate of Northern Nigeria and the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. And then separately, there was the colony of Lagos and the Yoruba interland. Now, those of you who don't know the ethnic makeup of Nigeria, it's helpful to remember that there are 3 big blocks. They're the Yoruba, my people, in the southwest of Nigeria. They're the Igbos, my wife's people, in the southeast of Nigeria. And then they're the Hausa in the north of Nigeria. And you often hear them referred to as Hausa Fulani. Now, it was my friend of yesteryears from Highbury, Joseph Chamberlain, who set the process in motion for the creation of one Nigeria. So by the time he left office in 1903, he had already laid the plans for a series of amalgamations which were going to produce one Nigeria, which was taken from the Israelis' campaign of one nation. That's where the one Nigeria originated from. So first in 1906 came the amalgamation of the colony of Lagos and the Yoruba interland with my wife's peoples in the east, the Protectorate of Southern Nigeria, to form what was then known as the Colony and Protectorate of Southern Nigeria. This was done by the edict of the then king, King Edward VII. Then in 1914 came the big one, the amalgamation of southern Nigeria, predominantly Christian, with northern Nigeria, almost wholly Islamic. This was done by the edict of King George V. The next major development was the reversal of the amalgamation of east southern Nigeria and west southern Nigeria, i.e. my wife's people and my people. This happened in 1939, April Fool's Day, to be specific, 1939. And this was done by administrative fiat of the Colonial Office. What then happens next in our chronology is the Atlantic Charter of August 1941, which promised self-determination, effectively, to all peoples. Now, the interpretation of that charter that was adopted by the Colonial Office, however, was simply to bring the subject peoples to self-rule under the British Crown. This is the point at which Elizabeth Regina comes onto the stage. She took the throne on the 6th of February 1952 at the tender age of 25. The campaign for independence was already approaching its climax at that very point. The first sitting of the Nigerian House of Representatives had taken place just days before her elevation to the throne on 29th of January 1952. So the beginning of Elizabeth's reign actually coincides with Nigeria's experiment with democracy. The first sitting of the House of Representatives, 29th of January 1952, and Queen Elizabeth emerges onto the throne in February 1952, 6th of February. It is that detail that underscores the importance of this audit that we are now taking of the Nigeria journey to date, now that Queen Elizabeth has left the stage. And especially, I say, with the new personalities that we now have in Buckingham Palace and also in 10 Downing Street. Timely audit. Now, what was Nigeria like during Elizabeth's reign? I've talked about the building and the construction of Nigeria before her reign. What about Nigeria during Elizabeth's reign? Now, she met Nigeria, as I say, in the early stages of the political crisis, which prevailed right throughout her reign. The Coronation Commission, having announced in June 1952 that her coronation would be taking place on 2nd of June 1953. You can imagine the shock and horror on the faces of those in the Colonial Office when on the 31st of March 1953, the upstart radicals in southern Nigeria tabled a motion for the independence of Nigeria, with effect from 1956, the end of the then current parliamentary term. We're leaving. It was, of course, never going to happen. especially since India had just been lost just 6 years before in 1947. What the nationalists got instead of independence was the hastily convened Constitutional Conference in London in 1954 and a visit from the Queen herself in 1956, the very year in which they had wished for independence. But the campaign for independence, although it could be slowed, it could not be stopped. And on 1st of October 1960, independence was granted to Nigeria by an act of the British Parliament. Although Parliament had thus left the stage, Elizabeth remained as head of state. This continued until 1st of October 1963, when Nigeria declared itself a republic. Even then, she remained connected with the country as head of the British Commonwealth. It was in February 1965 that Major General Welby Everard was replaced as Commander-in-Chief of the Nigerian Army. His successor, Thomas Agui Ironsi, had been the Queen's equerry during her Nigerian tour in 1956. 11 months later, on 15th of January 1966, came the first military coup, which saw Ironsi become Nigeria's first military ruler, following the assassination of Prime Minister Balewa. The political horror show was only just about to begin. The first round of pogroms in the north against my wife's Igbo peoples occurred on the 29th of May, 1966. The second round occurred on the 29th of July, 1966, as part of the counter-coup in which Ironsi was murdered and replaced by General Yakubu Gowon. The third and bloodiest round of pogroms against the Igbos in the north occurred on the 29th of September 1966. You notice the coincidence of dates. 29th of May, 29th of July, 29th of September. A mass exodus of Igbos in the north to eastern Nigeria followed. As I was saying, peace talks in Aburi, Ghana in January 1967 produced what was then known as the Aburi Accord, by which all parties committed to a more federal arrangement, with each region having military control of its own area. When that compromise was reneged upon by the Gowon government, which instead announced the division of Nigeria into 12 states, the independent state of Biafra was declared on the 29th/30th of May 1967. Now you may wonder, how is a declaration made on the 29th/30th? It's because it happened at 2 a.m. on the 29th. And from my earlier submissions, you remember the dates, the 29th of May, the first round of pogroms, the second round, 29th of July, and the third round, 29th of September. So we then had this mysterious declaration of the state of Biafra at 2 a.m. on the 29th of May 1967. The war, which began in July 1967, ended with the unconditional surrender of the Biafrans on 15th of January 1970. It was a brutal war in which figures in the range of 3 million Igbos are reported to have died through a combination of bombs, bullets, and starvation. Since the end of that war, Nigeria has been moving from one political crisis to another, with military rule alternating with civilian rule. It was only as head of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in December 2003 that Queen Elizabeth paid her one and only other visit to Nigeria during her reign. One can thus see that Nigeria's experiment with democracy in Elizabeth's time has been a story of much bloodshed and tribulation. What then of the outlook for Nigeria and Britain after Elizabeth? As we speak, the country is preparing for a winner-takes-all presidential election in February 2023. The three main candidates seem to me to be three flavors of the very same ice cream. All three, Bola Tinubu from the southwest, Peter Obi from the southeast, and Abubakar Atiku from the north, are billionaires. All have accounting stroke trading backgrounds. None brings to the table any new thinking on the underpinning constitutional problem. This is troubling at a time when, more than ever before, Nigerians understand that Nigeria is operating without a constitution. It is simply held together through the barrel of General Buhari's guns. Last week, on the 20th of October, we marked the second anniversary of the Lekki massacre of young Nigerians who were singing the national anthem. The currency, the naira, is in free fall, and the exodus of the young and talented is growing. What then can we expect in the relationship between Nigeria and Britain after Elizabeth? Here I think we must be guided by history. I turn first to words spoken by the Secretary of State for the Colonies, Oliver Littleton, Lord Chandos, as he was otherwise known, on the 21st of May, 1953, during the emergency debate on Nigeria's constitutional future, roughly a week before Queen Elizabeth's coronation. This is what he said. Recent events have shown that it is not possible for the three regions of Nigeria to work together effectively in a federation so closely knit as that provided by the present constitution. Her Majesty's government in the United Kingdom, while greatly regretting this, considered that the constitution will have to be redrawn to provide for greater regional autonomy and for the removal of powers of intervention by the centre in matters which can, without detriment to other regions, be placed entirely within regional competence. It is, at the same time, necessary to ensure that the common economic and defence requirements of all regions are secured. I next turn to the words of Sir Peter Smithers, who was the Parliamentary Private Secretary to the Minister of State and the Secretary of State in the Colonial Office from 1952 to 59, in the run-up to Nigeria's independence. He was also the Secretary General to the Council of Europe from 1964 to 1969. Writing in the Times on July the 15th, 1998, he said this: "Sir, during the negotiations for the independence of Nigeria, the view of the Secretary of State at that time, with which I agreed, was that in Nigeria we should attempt to put together a large and powerful state with ample material resources, which will play a leading part in the affairs of the continent and the world. This was attractive, but it involved forcing several different ethnic and cultural groups into a single political structure. The negotiations were complex and very difficult. The chief problem, as I remember, relating significantly to the control of the police and the military. In the retrospect of 40 years, it is clear that this was a grave mistake, which has cost many lives and will probably continue to do so. It would have been better to establish several smaller states in a free trade area. In exculpation, it must be said that we did not then have the examples of the collapse of Yugoslavia, I knew Princess Katerina will respond to that. We did not have the examples of the collapse of Yugoslavia and of the Soviet Union before our eyes. It should now be clear for all but the willfully blind to see that it is extremely dangerous to force diverse racial and social entities into a single rigid structure, such as that which is being built upon the foundation of the Maastricht Treaty. Recent history suggests that it would be best to complete the development of the common market and to call a halt to political integration in Europe. Well, we all know about Brexit, don't we? It must follow in the retrospect of a further 24 years since Sir Peter Smithers wrote that piece to the Times, that it remains extremely dangerous to keep diverse racial and social entities in a single rigid structure, such as we see in Nigeria. When we remember that one of the claims made to justify the original British colonization project was to put a stop to the practice of human sacrifice by despotic rulers, it is a tragic irony to observe that more Nigerian lives have been sacrificed since the push for one Nigeria was started by my friend Chamberlain in 1900 than those despotic rulers could ever have taken. And as Sir Peter Smithers warned, more will continue to be sacrificed as long as this remains the agenda. What then is to be done? Since I don't believe that the relationship between Nigeria and Britain after Elizabeth is going to be left to the willfully blind, not least with a Prime Minister who has every reason to understand imperial history, what should we expect? The answer takes us back to the times of our friend, Joseph Chamberlain. It was Prime Minister William Gladstone's policy of Home Rule for Ireland, meaning a separate parliament with full powers to deal with Irish affairs, which led to Chamberlain's resignation from the Liberal Party on the 27th of March, 1886. He viewed Home Rule for Ireland as the weakening of Parliament's control over the United Kingdom. Gladstone's speech in the debate on the Irish Home Rule Bill makes interesting reading in relation to the political situation in today's Nigeria. This is what he said. I wish now to refer to another matter. I hear constantly use the terms unionists and separatists. But what I want to know is, who are the unionists? I want to know, who are the separatists? In Nigeria, in the current time, the equivalent labels are one Nigerianists and secessionists. Gladstone continued, but we believe, as proved by history, that where there are those disturbed relations between countries associated but not incorporated, the true principle is to make ample provision for local independence, subject to imperial unity. These are propositions of the greatest interest and importance. Gentlemen speak of tightening the ties between England and Ireland as if tightening the tie were always the means to be adopted. Tightening the tie is frequently the means of making it burst, whilst relaxing the tie is very frequently the way to provide for its durability and to enable it to stand a stronger strain. So it is true that the separation of legislatures is often the union of countries, and the union of legislatures is often the severance of countries. So the choice that will shape the relationship between Britain and Nigeria after Elizabeth is the one between the union of legislators and the severance of the ethnic groups which were thrown together to make one Nigeria, or the separation of legislators for the continued union of these groups. The bitter harvest from Nigeria's experiments with democracy during the reign of Elizabeth, coupled with the clear warnings from the Secretary of State for the Colonies in 1953, as repeated by his parliamentary private secretary in 1998, and with the greater level of awareness through social media by a new generation of Nigerians of their history, and, perhaps most importantly, with the new man down the road at 10 Downing Street, I am confident that my prediction that the road ahead is more in line with Gladstone's Home Rule Bill for Ireland and a firm rejection of the One Nigeria template created by that arch-imperialist from my Highbury neighbourhood, Joseph Chamberlain. Let me conclude these remarks by sharing with you what the new Nigeria will look like. I turn to the French philosopher Rousseau, 18th century, who defined the challenge as follows. The problem is to find a form of association which will defend and protect with the whole common force the person and good of each associate, and in which each, while uniting himself with all, may still obey himself alone and remain as free as before. This is the fundamental problem which the social contract provides the solution for. I ask for Rousseau's words in relation to Nigeria to be imagined as the Orange Union, in contradistinction to the Union of the Apple. When you peel the skin of the orange, you will see the segments sitting comfortably side by side, together making the composite whole. Whereas where you peel the skin of the apple, you will see the indistinguishable mass. That Orange Union, in which the ethnic groups uniting to make the whole in association but in which, an association in which they may still obey their own priorities and remain as free as before. I conclude by inviting us to proclaim loudly, the Queen is dead. Long live the King. And might I add, long live Prime Minister Sunak.